I am here now, wondering how to complete this literary journey now that my healing journey has concluded. My physical journey is still pending, as is evident by the now familiar sound of the highway nearby. I can't sleep. It's not for lack of trying, nor for the noise of the wayfaring trucks taking advantage of the deserted stretch of highway in these wee hours. My anxiety and unease are actually in response to the eerie quiet across the motel. It's been 2 days since the disappearance of the young couple that had moved into the motel room next to ours. They were not discreet in their interpersonal disputes, and I wonder now if I had ever been that disrespectful, volatile, or egocentric in my youth. I gauged them to be in their late teens or early 20s, which is the most that they could have been, as the still shrill voice of the male indicated that he had not finished completing his transition into manhood. His lack of testicular fortitude was evident in more than just the high pitched tone of his voice, but in how he used it. He lacked any emotional regulation and was aggressive, attacking, and violent in all respects. I was hearing voice crescendos and curses, followed by crashes, doors banging, and female wailing. Their first 24 hours in residence, I disconnected from the situation, so triggered I was by the sheer familiarity of it all. I was dealing with the situation the way I dealt with it in my marriage. I ignored it and focused instead on transmuting it, lest Wrigley understand what was happening and become affected. As the days multiplied, I realized that I was not just disconnecting, I was disassociating. An invite from some locals to host Wrigley at a kids' function allowed me the time and space to access my feelings. They came in slowly at first, sadness for the girl and fear of getting involved and getting hurt myself. Then I became angry, mostly at the inevitability of my involvement due to their lack of discretion and decorum. They were on my watch now, and I was not going to allow for any indecorous and harmful behaviors. It was not long until the situation needed my intervention, and I heard him audibly leave the motel room and property, leaving her sobbing outside the room, having been locked out. I paced my own room, wondering how safe I felt giving her sanctuary, but quickly decided that there was a reason that God had created an opportunity for my son to be gone for that day. I gathered her out of the cold, offering her a hot drink, using the offer as a way to steel myself from launching into a lecture. He had hit her, she told me. It was the first time he had done so, and that they had just been released from jail, and he was under a lot of stress and didn't have a place to go, and yada, yada, yada. She was caught in the web, in the cycle of emotional addiction and violence. I was devastated. She was a rather round, indigenous girl and was supposed to return home the next day by bus, a mere 2 hours away. You're so close to your people, just go! Hitchhike if you have to, I thought ignorantly. I was choosing to forget how impossible it felt to leave my ex-husband, my own abuser. How unsafe, insecure, and lonely I felt every time I thought I had gotten up the courage to finally leave. My rational mind was warring with my now very loud and live memory of my own abusive marriage, triggered as I was by the situation. I wanted to save her. I needed to save her, and myself, from the helplessness and overwhelm once again at the hands of domestic violence. I put some coconut milk to warm in the microwave, my secret to the decadent hot chocolate that my son loves. The momentary act of engaging in a routine that was safe and nurturing allowed me to come back to the present reality of the situation in a way that was not activated, but was proactive and productive. I invited her to sit safely in my room for as long as she needed until we could figure out what was next. She stated that she wanted to go get her belongings, but that they were in the room and he had walked off with the key. While it might have been true that he had had the only key outside of the room, both of their names were on the room, and so I assured her she could get her own copy. She had agency and power in this situation. She hesitated, growing quiet. Behind where she was sitting at my room window, I saw the shadowy figure of her boyfriend re-entering the parking lot on foot. All too soon, our moment of peace would be shattered by his presence, and any sway I had on her as a compassionate bystander would be gone. To gauge the situation, I said woodenly, "He's coming back." She mumbled, "I'll be back," and avoiding eye contact with me, quickly left the room. I stood listening to their muffled conversations outside of their own motel room door where he was smoking a cigarette. The ding of the microwave brought me back to my surroundings, and I set about making 2 cups of hot chocolate. I zipped my hoodie higher on my neck and flipped the hood up, almost instinctively, to not expose my jugular, breasts, hair, or anything else that might translate to female vulnerability. I exited the room with false authority and handed 1 cup of hot chocolate to the girl, saying, "You left your hot chocolate," before turning to the boy, saying, "Here's one for you." I went on to say to them both, "And I don't want to hear any mess. I have a young child and don't need this," before turning back to the boy and saying, "Make our ancestors proud." I heard him say, "Yes, ma'am," over the roar in my head, and I returned to my room, shut the curtains, and collapsed on the bed, triumphant but exhausted. Despite my fear of I would find in my feelings, I sat with everything that was coming up. I sat with anger at his abuse. I sat with the disappointment that he was a black man and perpetuating stereotypes and statistics. I sat with my disappointment in her for going directly back into his arms and comforting him, cradling his head against her heavy bosom. I sat with disgust at myself for this line of thinking and the lack of compassion, even while knowing how hard it is to break toxic patterns and intergenerational trauma. Trauma that could lead one to be either perpetrator or victim in these situations. How dare I judge either of them? Besides, I had been there myself not too long ago. No matter. He now knew someone else had witnessed his shameful behavior and had made a direct request for him to change, or at least to be quiet about it. No! I wanted him to change, and I wanted him to be quiet. I felt like I did not need to worry about the level of volume because in my naive delusion I thought I had gotten through to him and he would stop the violence. I mean, he called me ma'am. Surely that meant something. It meant nothing. That night, voices began to escalate once more. Thankfully, my son had already entered into a deep slumber, but the challenge was to now keep him there. I tried banging on the wall, but to no avail. They simply did not care, and I felt that they had thrown my care, concern, and kindness into my face like a cup of scalding hot chocolate. I wanted to call the police, but I used the excuse that my phone was off to buy them some more time. The sounds grew louder and more violent. I turned my phone on, and in the time it was taking to boot up, 1,000 thoughts crossed my mind, mostly having to do with my own dubious relationship with and distrust of authority figures of all types. I thought of the plight of many black men in America living in a very justified fear of the police and being harmed even during the most routine of inquiries. I did not want to be the cause of a young man's murder. Then I thought of myself and my son. Were we safe? What would happen if the young man found out it was me that made the call? I always told myself that snitches get stitches, bitches. And although it usually applied in the most innocuous of circumstances, and with much humor and obvious irony, I could not deny that I was fearing the backlash of filing a report. I pushed my fear aside and thought of all of us. The young girl needs to understand the severity of the situation, as it evidently he did. My son and I deserve peace, and surely we paid for it with the price of the motel room, right? I called 911 and reported the goings-on. I stayed on the phone until officers arrived, after which the operator hung up and I turned my phone off once again. I listened through the wall at the situation to see if it would be translated somehow that I had made the call. To my chagrin, it was. And to my fury, not only did the girl lie and say that he'd never hit her, but she corroborated his story that I had been somehow mistreating my own son and that Child Protective Services should be called, an attempt to deflect attention from them and their own misbehaviors. It was only because of my son that did not add fuel to that fire with my presence at the interrogation. The police left, and with them, whatever argument the couple were engaged in. The only noise I heard for the rest of the evening was the sound of the television, and as the sun was hitting the horizon, I drifted back to sleep, thinking only one thing, that I wish I had had the courage to call the police on my ex-husband at the time of his many abuses. I wish somebody had been there to call on my behalf, even. I would not have lied to the police about it. I would have been eager for someone outside of our relationship to witness the atrocities and rescue me. I just didn't think that anyone would believe me if it was my word against his, him being a white male, British at that. And with the history of mental illness in my family, he kept declaring that no one would believe me and everyone would just assume that I was crazy. As I now nurture myself at dawn with a cup of the same decadent hot chocolate that I have been giving to everyone else but myself, I am in full realization of my place in space, both in this metaphorical wilderness, in my own life, and perhaps in history. I have forgotten that Mary, too, had traversed and taken refuge in the biblical desert, not just Jesus. I am processing in the wee hours of the morning and realize how invalidating I have been not only to myself but to all of the divine feminine figures throughout history, women that have had to put on their armor of God and battle through dark forces regardless of cultural mores, only to be maligned, misremembered, or worse, completely forgotten or replaced by a male archetype, as if their heroism only exists in replication or embodiment of a masculine energy. Both Marys, Jesus' mother and Mary Magdalene, Jesus' often suspected wife, had both spent their time in the desert, and Mary Magdalene is believed to have spent the last of her life in a cave in earnest prayer. The popcorn ceiling stalactites were then biblical, prophetic, not merely philosophical. I owed a debt of gratitude to these women for their sanctified suffering. I refuse to sacrifice the divine feminine any longer on the altar of shame, mine or others. I will no longer adorn myself in chin-zipped hoodies with my hair tightly bound in austerity or covered to give me more of masculine appearance. I want to show my fearless femininity by way of my throat in a manner that says, I walk in my truth and you will not silence me. My throat may be bare, but you will have to reach it by way of my teeth and claws. I had mistakenly believed that my trauma hardened exterior meant that I no longer gave a damn, but what it really highlighted was how far removed I was from my sacred feminine self, that I had been abandoned and had stopped protecting her, like so many friends and family had done to me before. The world teaches women that to be strong, to be divine, righteous, right, or brave even, one needs to be more masculine, look to or defer to a masculine, or be in their masculine energy. But that just isn't so. It took a lot of strength to call the police and not to try to confront that boy myself. It took courage to tell him to make our ancestors proud, and most importantly, there was heroism in that offer of hot chocolate and a few moments of peaceful sanctuary. I hope I can continue to be brave and stay soft enough to be nurturing and give the world more metaphorical hot chocolate moments in the future. For now, through this darkest of nights, my soul rejoices in what I have found hidden in the dark depths. I have found a conclusion to my healing journey, at least for now. I have found the peace of becoming someone I needed when I was a younger woman newly married to a monster. Someone standing in their power, their feminine power, and calling down the hammer of justice via law enforcement. I have found reconciliation in the protection of that paternal force of the police department, who protected me by proxy in a way my dad could never have against my husband, who I married after his death. Police who protected me in a way that I would never have allowed them to do during my marriage, due to the shame and guilt I carried for the way I was living and what I was allowing that man to do to me. I will use the ubiquitous dust in the hills behind the motel room as proxy dust to my father's ashes, and I will shortly let go of any expectation that healing is another hilltop away. I realize that grief isn't something you finish. It folds itself into your being, like a stone settling at the bottom of a riverbed. The current keeps moving, and you move with it. I had carried my father across continents, scattered pieces of him into oceans, mountains, and forgotten towns. Each place felt like a conversation I was having with him, one-sided but meaningful all the same. In those moments, I wasn't just leaving him behind, I was also gathering him up in new ways. The spiritual awakening that unraveled my mind has shown me that loss isn't a clean break, it's a doorway, a portal. My father had stepped through it in many ways, so had I. I'm not the woman I was when I started this journey, nor when I started this awakening. I've died many times since then. And whether the awakening was real, imagined, or imposed, honestly doesn't matter any longer. There were things that needed to die, and I accept that this was how it needed to happen. I have to. I keep walking, carrying fragments of my father stitched into my spirit. The line between his presence and absence is blurred, and maybe that was the point all along. Full integration of all aspects of self in and through the experience. I've come to understand that my greatest gift to my son is to live fully and in the now, to chase my dreams without hesitation, so that when my time comes, I leave no burden of unfulfilled desire on his shoulders, no regrets for what should have or could have been, no cups of hot chocolate unmade. I want him to know freedom, not obligation, to feel inspired by my life and our life together, not tasked with finishing it. My father in his absence taught me as much as he did in life, more even. The lessons came like whispers at first, reminders to be present, to forgive, to take chances, to do what is right. And so I pass those lessons on to my son, not his weight, but his wings. I want him to know that I walk my path with purpose so that he can walk his own with courage. I honestly don't know anymore which direction we will take once the car is fixed. In this moment, there no longer seems to be much reason to return to that Pacific Northwest city that I felt owed me answers, assuagement, and repair. As trite and cliche as this sounds, it is true that the journey is a destination. And in that vein, I think I found what I was seeking and much, much more. I have arrived.